We'll just tackle a light topic today. That's kind of the goal. Just a light topic, nothing too crazy. This isn't talked about at all. So this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about abortion this week, probably for sure next week, maybe even the next week, because I'm going to kind of handle this. I've sat this week trying to figure out how are we going to approach this, because this is such a huge topic, and I want to handle it in kind of three waves. And so as weird as it is, I know our study is navigating America's issues from a biblical perspective, but because of this issue this week, I'm not even going to have any verses. I know it sounds really weird, but it's because we got to kind of set a foundation underneath this, and that kind of uses a natural law to try to make an argument. So I'm going to use the moral argument. We'll talk about that a little bit, of why this is a problem issue, okay? And then next week will be the biblical perspective. So you're going to have the full gamut by the time we're done with this one, okay? But I wanted to break it down and we kind of get into it in a few different ways. So here's how we're going to approach this one. We're going to look at the moral argument from nature. This is what we're doing this week. Now, if anybody knows me, I like apologetics. I like defense of the faith stuff. I like arguments that you don't necessarily have to say, let me read you a verse. You can just appeal to the world, to the universe, to the principles of logic, and then people will stop and say, even if I don't believe your Bible, I'm willing to consider the argument. I'm willing to consider. So I'm going to approach it a little bit. That's going to be kind of today, is that piece. I want to look at the origin of the issue. Why is it even an issue at all? We'll probably tackle that one today. And then next week, we'll look at the biblical response. So you're going to have to commit yourself to being here this week, next week, maybe one more week to get through the whole thing. We're going to look at the arguments supporting this issue. So one of the things that's common with this discussion is, and it divides a lot of Christians, is when someone comes in and says, well, in the cases of, and then they throw out these cases, how do we approach that from a Christian perspective? When someone says life of the mother or, fill in the blank, okay? And so I want to tackle those on a separate time where we have more time to focus on that and see exactly where we can fall on that. And then honestly, one of the big ones, probably our last time when we last discussed this, maybe 2-3 weeks, we're going to discuss the best approach. And then I put strategy to take as Christians considering the voting options that are out there. And the reason I put approach strategy is because I think sometimes we think we're just going to be able to turn this around, boom, 180. And sometimes issues become so enrooted in the hearts of people and so broadly that it can't just be flipped that quickly without some catastrophic unintended consequences. Okay? And so we're going to talk about that towards the end. And we might even look at just some of the things that have been said out there in the political spectrum on this topic and then kind of evaluate them. So that's where we're going with this. I just wanted to kind of do a little outline of where we're headed. So here's question one for today. We're going to set some kind of foundational pieces and questions out there before we even start talking about abortion. But as founded, how important was the concept of life and the ability to live from a country standpoint, from America's founding? How important is it, the concept of life? It's kind of fundamental, isn't it? Pretty much a fundamental piece. So you guys have heard of this thing. Okay. What does it say? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so the founding documents, one of them, says right here a few important things that I have underlined, bolded, and italicized so we won't miss them. Okay? The first one is, how important is life? Of all the things they could have listed, what did they put on here? Number one, life. Okay, we're going to have to get to some definitions of that in a moment. They also defined life as a unalienable right. Okay, and rights have to come from somewhere. They can't just be willy-nilly opinions. So where did this right come from in their mind? It goes back to the first thing they said, which is by their creator. Okay? So as founded, we can't deny that life was extremely important to the founders in the purpose of this country, why it was founded, what it was founded upon. Creator gave rights, one of them being life. Okay? So can we all agree life is important to the founders? It was extremely important. Now we'll get to some defining pieces here. What do we mean by this in a second? But we have to understand that as a fundamental piece. So America was founded, regardless of your religious view, on the idea that human beings have a right to live. It should be protected above everything. You should be given this thing, and you can do this, and no one can take it away. Isn't that kind of the idea of a right? You have a right to vote. You have a right to bear arms. Those are all fundamental things under our founding documents. So here's the question, what did the founders mean by live? Because that's an important one, don't you think? I went to Webster's 1828 dictionary. Why am I using the 1828 dictionary? Closer to their day. You know, we're not too far away, but we're closer to their day. Because if you get into the modern dictionary, do they change the wording sometimes? You know, they add words that these guys didn't even have. So the hard part is when you say, well, what did Washington or Adams or they mean when they wrote live? We need to get as close as we can to someone in their neck of the woods that would have understood the word. Daniel Webster was one of those guys. You know, he was called, he believed that God called him to write a dictionary. So he went out and he started writing it. You know, what a wonderful calling. Thanks, God, that's what I wanted to do. Write a dictionary. So I went to his dictionary, and he has a ton of information under the word live. A lot of different definitions because of how it's applied. But the first one at the top was abide and dwell. Okay. He put to be animated. Okay. I was said live versus dead, something, you know, animated versus not. To have the principles of plant life. Okay, well, my next question when I read this one was, what do you mean by principles of plant life? How do we define a living plant? What's it doing? It's growing. It's receiving nutrients as it continues to grow. It's a system that's allowed to work. That was actually kind of the idea when he defined this. It's about these systems that a plant has. And it functions with purpose to allow the plant to abide and dwell, live, be animated, grow. So that was a big one. Growth was a big one. What does it mean to live? Well, it means that you're growing. To continue. You have the ability as you live to continue on until forces of such way stop that process. Okay? But live is to continue. To remain undestroyed.
That's good.
Kind of an interesting one, huh? Well, that would make sense, because if you're not living, you're dead. Let live, destroy. You can see how the contrast is there. So live, in the context of the declaration, means human beings as created by God Almighty should be able to continue in their animated state of being alive, growing and functioning as time passes. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
That is my definition using Webster's stuff and the founding documents. I said, here's how I'm understanding live in their mind. Would you agree with this? Do you think this is appropriate? Okay, so here's a question. Can you think of a society that praised and encouraged the killing of the innocent? Now, I kind of smuggled in some words here. I said praised and encouraged the killing of what? Innocent. So that has to be defined, doesn't it? Because what would the Nazis say? Were the Jews innocent?
No, they killed Christ.
No, they had a definition that they had defined them a certain way, right?
Yes.
Communists, you fill in the blank. There has to be a definition. But if a nation thinks someone is innocent, really innocent in the sense of their definition of innocence, okay? Not like the Nazis had people they would say they were innocent, then therefore they should not be killed. They would probably apply that to the Nazis, right? They would say, we're the innocent ones. We're the ones. But they all have a definition of innocence. Agreed?
Sparta,
Maybe, yeah. Ancient Greek.
they would leave the babies out.
Okay. So everyone, despite their labels, has a group they would define as innocent. Can we all agree with that? Even the Nazis. Would they think it's okay to kill that group and encourage and praise to kill their innocent? They're innocent. No, we agree from our perspective that there's been groups that have killed innocent and praised it and encouraged it. But you see, we're seeing that through our lens. I want you to go to their society. Did they have people that they declare innocent? Good. Is it okay to kill them in their mind? No, it's not. Every society has a group they would label the innocent. And they don't think it's okay to kill them. It's never encouraged, it's never praised. Why is that? Why is it like that in every society? That there seems to be a contrast that exists, doesn't matter which society it is, that the group that's defined as innocent among that particular group is not praised and encouraged to be killed. So fundamentally, even in the worst of worst, the Bible says this. Even a bad person won't give his son a snake, and when he asks for a fish, wants food. Why is that? Why do we have this understanding that you don't praise and encourage killing the innocent in the definition of innocence that you have? There's no society that thinks it's okay and praises and encourages the killing of their innocent. You have to redefine innocence so you can justify killing them then. Wouldn't you? Because it doesn't exist. It's a moral absolute. Well, let's talk about this for a second. Fundamentally, why would a system that encourages and praises killing of, their innocent, not work? Just fundamentally, why would it not work? What are you doing to yourself? You're exterminating yourself, aren't you? Because if innocence is determined by a certain number of principles, and you can bet that the people who are enforcing these principles think they're what? Innocent! And so if you praise and encourage the killing of the innocent, what ultimately happens to the civilization? It just everybody's killing each other, and the civilization wipes out, and it's exterminated. Is that a bad thing? Now here, we're into the moral argument. Why is it a bad thing if a civilization wipes itself out? Who says that's a bad thing? You're going to hear that a lot. Who says? Who says? You're going to hear that a lot today. Who says it's bad a civilization wipes themselves out? Every civilization wants to thrive. Every one of them. Every nation is trying to thrive. They're trying to survive. It's like there's this fundamental rule in the universe that living things try their best to survive. Is that not true? Why is that a good thing? Why is it a good thing if we survive? There has to be someone that ultimately said, at the most fundamental level, that it is good to live. Right? Who says? So why do we, by our own subconscious, our own innate actions, we follow that rule? Do you realize that? We follow it. It's a moral absolute that we believe it's good to live and bad to not live.
Even if you want to die.
Yeah. And people usually that want to die are trying to escape something that's causing them harm, and so they think that will give them relief.
But you choose to live.
Because we want life. Even when we aren't getting it, we want it. We go after it. We pursue it. Why is the question. We're kind of in philosophy class today. Why do we care? And if there is no God, and there is no standard, and there is no absolute moral standard, why do we care about that at all? And you can't escape it. Because you're going to go out here and you're going to do it today when you go get food. You're constantly pursuing how to live. Live, not die.
Self-preservation.
Self-preservation is like we're born with it, right? Why? And yeah, it's an obvious answer. The Creator made it so. And you can't get away from it, can you? You can't escape it. And so at the fundamental level, we have this desire to live and do what we have to live. Some people go to crazy means to survive, right? So here's some more questions. Is it a good thing to live? Who says?
Everyone who's living.
Everyone who's living? Well, even before anybody was living, God made plants and he did some things that were alive. Would you agree? Before man was kind of the capstone of the whole thing, but you still had plants and animals, and these things were living. And they didn't exist, and then they were living, and God didn't say, okay, let's just exterminate them, let's let them die. What did he want them to do? Right. Continue to live. Continue on, to dwell and abide, kind of like Webster said, right? If we desire to live, and we say that's a good thing, even the atheist is going to say that. How do you ground that if you don't believe that there's one who says that's a good thing? See what I mean? There's a lot of atheists that do this to themselves. They pin themselves in this thing.
So you're saying
they use terms like well-being. It's for the well-being of men that we have morals in society. But they were created by governments, not by God. What do you mean by well-being? Why is it good for men to have well-being instead of not? And they just can't answer it. They get to the spot where they go, And so then I've literally listened to guys say, well, then you must think it's okay to torture babies for fun. And they go, well, no, I wouldn't go that far. Who says? And they eventually have to backtrack. So why do we pursue and contend for continued existence rather than allow ourselves to be removed from existence? It's like a fundamental universal principle for living things to want to exist and continue on and to abide and dwell and thrive and grow, right? Is it reasonable to believe that all people seek to continue their existence? Is that reasonable? Yeah, because you go find that somewhere where that's not the case. Even people that are struggling, it's because they have terrible things and they want to escape them and they want a life that's better. They want relief. They want peace. Is this a universal principle of being a human being? To want to live and exist? Yeah, I would say it is. I don't know too many who don't. I mean, I know some people who have who wanted to escape life, but it's because they wanted peace. Why do they want peace? Because that's what we want. That's how we're created. Is there something within us unlearned that promotes the principle? It's like this is how you were designed, isn't it? How you were created. You didn't have to learn it. You're going to hear some C.S. Lewis today. I want to read this to you. They, he says people, say things like this. How'd you like it if someone did the same thing to you? That's my seat. I was there first. Leave me alone. Leave him alone. He isn't doing you any harm. Give me a bit of your orange. I gave you a bit of mine. I don't think I've ever used that one. Come on, you promised. People say things like that every day, educated as well as uneducated, and children as well as grown-ups. Now, what interests me about all these remarks is that the man who makes them is not merely saying that the other man's behavior does not happen to please him. He is appealing to some kind of standard of behavior which he expects the other man to know about. And you didn't have to learn it. See what he's saying? He goes on to say this. Nearly always he's talking about the other man, tries to make out that what he has been doing does not really go against the standard, or that if it does, there is some special excuse. Quarreling means trying to show that the other man is in the wrong. Well, that's a fundamental to humanity, right? And there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he had some sort of agreement as to what right and wrong are. You can't escape it, can you? Doesn't matter where you've been, doesn't matter if you've been to school or not, or you learned it, you cannot escape it. Universal principle. I know that some people say the idea, he calls it the law of nature. That's what he calls it. The idea of a law of nature or decent behavior known to all men is unsound because different civilizations in different ages have had quite different moralities. But this is not true. There have been differences between their moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. So you can get to the details. He goes on to say, think of a country where people are admired for running away in battle. You might just as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 make 5. It's interesting because C.S. Lewis actually, he says this, the question is to which class the law of human nature belongs. It belongs in the same class as mathematics. So he's saying this law that we're talking about is in the same category as math. It doesn't matter where you go, 2 and 2 will always be 4. Now I know there's places that are trying to rewrite that, which is just crazy, right? But it doesn't work at the bank, does it? Sir, behind the counter, I'd like to make a withdrawal. I believe that I have 10 grand in there. Sir, you only have 5. We did the math. No. What are they going to do? Security, and you're out the door. All right? They're going to kick you right out. Kick you right out. That's why C.S. Lewis takes this same moral law that we're talking about, and he says it's like math. It doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what place you're in, it's still the same. I even heard the argument one time, in Hinduism, we eat cows. What do they believe about cows? They're sacred. See how the morals change? Is it really a different moral? Why don't Hindus eat cows? They think they're people. They're reincarnated people, and you don't eat people, which we would agree with. See, it's not that far off. They just have a different belief on the same fundamental moral law. You don't eat people. So we're not going to eat cows because we think those are people. It's weird, but it still makes the point. The moral law exists. Here's what he says. When you think about these differences in morality of one people and another, do you think that the morality of one people is ever better or worse than that of another? Have any of the changes been improvements? If not, then of course there could never be any moral progress. Progress means not just changing, but changing for the better. If not set of moral ideas were truer or better than any other, there would be no sense in preferring civilized morality to savage morality or Christian morality to Nazi morality. In fact, of course, we all do believe that some moralities are better than others. In other words, by making an argument to say that is better, you have to be appealing to something that defines that as better. Does that make sense? So when we ask the question, what is good? We're kind of in that same vein. What's better? What's good? What's right? The only way you're going to get there is you have to have something that is absent from that thing itself that is the standard by which you can appeal to, which you can ground that position. So when you hear the term progressive, what does that mean? What do they believe they're going towards? Something better. The question is whether it is better. And then it comes back down to the question of who says it's better. We're not done with C.S. Lewis. The standard that measures two things is something different from either. That's extremely important. The standard at which you measure the things cannot be either one of those things. It has to be above all of them, or it doesn't work. You are, in fact, comparing them both with some, he called it real morality. When you're appealing to that's better, you're believing there's something out there that's like perfect morality, the thing you're trying to get to. And this is closer to that than this thing. He calls it real morality. Admitting that there is such a thing as a real right, independent of what people think, and that some people's ideas get nearer to the real right than others. In the same way, if the rule of decent behavior meant simply whatever each nation happens to approve, there would be no sense in saying that any one nation had ever been more correct in its approval than any other. No sense in saying that the world could ever grow morally better or morally worse. The law of nature exists. We deal with it. We use it. The nations deal with it. You cannot escape it. You can't escape it. It undergirds everything. I conclude then that though the difference between people's ideas of decent behavior often make you suspect that there is no real law of nature, law of behavior at all, yet the things we are bound to think about these differences really prove just the opposite. You cannot escape that you're trying to appeal to something more right for your position, no matter where you are, and that the other party's view is less. There has to be something above all of that. Ronald Reagan famously said, all those in favor of abortion have already been born. I think this ties directly into what we first talked about with this idea of life. There's a natural law that exists that human beings want to live. And so if you put a person who's alive and you give them an option, you get a mic in their face, do you want to continue to live? No, I don't. They're going to say, yeah, I want to live. I want to be successful. I want to thrive. And so it's kind of grounds this. You heard this term today? Why is tolerance the word of the day? Because you can make it so that anything goes, right? Norman Geisler said this, if there is no moral law, why should anyone be tolerant? Good question. If there's no natural moral law that says we should tolerate each other, then you have no basis to tell people to be tolerant. The plea to be tolerant is an admission that the behavior to be tolerated is wrong. Why? Because you don't need to plead with someone to tolerate good behavior, only bad. We're going to look at that in a second. No one needs to be talked into tolerating the behavior of Mother Teresa. We only make excuses when we act against the moral law. We wouldn't do so if it didn't exist. In other words, you have to try to talk people in to going against that natural moral law. You don't have to if it's in line with it. So by our reactions to things, you can even make an argument of what you should be doing. Isn't that kind of interesting? How we respond to certain things, how we try to talk people into certain things. If special pleading seeks one to go against the law of nature, what does that mean for abortion? What's the law of nature when it comes to just systems and plants and living beings?
They want to live.
You don't wipe your own existence out. It wouldn't work. It goes against the laws of nature. You have to plead with people. You'd have to plead with an individual to say, you should wipe yourself out. Right? Because naturally you don't want to do that. You want to live.
But morally it's wrong.
It is morally wrong. I agree with you. This is part of that undergirding the moral arguments rooted in nature. It's rooted in how the systems of the world function. Why is it wrong to wipe somebody out?
They have a right to live.
Who says? Right?
God does.
That's right. It ultimately comes down to who started the system, who gave it its rules and its purposes, its ends, the means to its ends, and are we in line with that or are we not? You could make the same argument with homosexuality. It goes against natural law. If everyone embraced it, what would happen? We would die out. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Bad thing. Some people would say, well, it's a great thing. Well, then perfect. You do whatever you want. But I would say the vast majority, 99% of people are going to say it's not a good thing for civilizations or peoples, all of humanity, to be gone. Like we should have people. Even Elon Musk says this. He's not a Christian guy. But he says it's not a good thing for civilizations to wipe themselves out. And so that's why he's even though he's the AI guy, he still says we got to get this thing under control because it will wipe us out. And that's a bad thing. Who says it's a bad thing? Even he knows, because you can't escape the natural moral law of nature. You can't escape it. Why do people need to be convinced that it's okay and right if it's naturally okay and right? That's my question. Why do we need to have this conversation if it just is part of the natural order to things?
To justify their actions.
Bingo! And what will we know about special pleading when it goes against the laws of nature? When you have to try and justify your actions against what's natural, it's probably wrong. It is wrong. Here's another question. When is a human being a human being? A lot of philosophy today, right? We're going to talk about that. Human beings have a God-given right to choose, is what that should say. Human beings have a God-given right to choose. Would you agree with that? Okay. Human beings can choose to have an abortion. You can. You can. As a human being. Since the right to choose is supreme, abortion is acceptable. This is the argument. This is one of the arguments. Because remember, what's it called? It's the right to choose versus the right to life. Here's another argument. Human beings have a God-given right to live. We just looked at that in the Declaration of Independence, but we can also argue that from natural moral law. Abortion stops the right to live in human beings. Since the right to live is supreme, or life is supreme, abortion is not acceptable. You see the debate? Which one takes priority? But the fundamental is, I either should get to choose first, and again, that's why that runs into a roadblock, because I'll show you right here. So which one takes priority? That's the debate that rages here, right? So the right to live or the right to choose. Let me show you. So the right to choose take priority is a bad argument. Why is that? What if I choose to take your property? Well, in that case, choice is not supreme. Why? Because I'm here, I already have stuff, you can't take my stuff. Wait a second, I thought the choice was supreme. So now we're boxing choice into when it's okay and when it's not. That's inconsistent. That doesn't work. That goes against the principles of logic. Why do we prioritize the right to have property secure over the right to choose in this instance? It's kind of inconsistent in our society, isn't it? What if I want to drive drunk? That's my choice. Why is that wrong? Why do we punish people for this legally if the right to choose is supreme?
They chose it, but they also choose the consequences.
Okay, so you're telling me that if there's negative consequences of something that could harm another person, that I can't do that thing, right? But I thought the right to choose was supreme. And they're saying, well, in some cases. Well, no, that's not how this works, So what must one do in order to make the right to choose work in the case of abortion? That's an important question. Because we just realized you can't choose certain things. It's not totally supreme, is it? I just can't choose to take your property. I'm going to have consequences. Even the government attests to that, as goofy as it is. In order to get there, because we realize it's not okay to go murder your neighbor. You can't just go kill them and take their stuff. They will throw you in jail for that. Okay? You and I do that. We're not going to get away with it. Now, governments, we can discuss that all day long, or different people groups. But you and I, the average Joe, we go do that, what's going to happen? You're going to jail, right? So, in order to justify abortion, you have to disconnect it from the concept of the right of human beings to live. Okay, so you see, fundamentally by nature, we know that humanity wants to do what? Live. We want to live. Everybody wants to live. We want to continue. We want to abide. We have systems. We want to grow. All these things. And so in order to justify that decision, you have to separate it from the law of nature to live and grow and be. But what happens? What do we have to do in order to get choice back on the table?
Redefine life.
We have to say life has to be changed. We have to redefine some things. Specifically, we have to redefine what a human being is in order to get to the thing we want. Even though science or whatever it may be, it might suggest otherwise. So how important are definitions? Therefore, one must redefine life to something else in order to allow for people to allow for the synchronization of the right to choose an abortion without violating the right to live. That sounds like a mouthful. But that's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to, we know that we have to be consistent. That's just part of the laws of non-contradictory. It's the first principles of logic. We can't contradict ourselves. So what do we have to do when we're contradicting ourselves? If we want to keep the ends that we're finding, we have to redefine it so it doesn't look like we're contradicting ourselves. We do it all the time. We try to justify and change things that have always been in order to be able to get the outcome and the behavior we want. That goes against the entire laws of nature. Doesn't it? Is it acceptable to torture babies for fun? If you say yes, let's meet afterwards, okay? But are there people that think it's acceptable to torture babies for fun? They're never going to admit it. See, here's the problem with this question. The answer is, on these terms, of course not. It's not okay to torture babies for fun. But in order to make this justifiable or acceptable, which words in my question have to be redefined?
Babies and nature and life.
Baby or babies? What else?
Torture.
Fun and torture have to be redefined, don't they? And if I can redefine those and get you to embrace my new definitions, what can I get you to do? So here's what you redefine. Baby. We just changed the term. What defines a baby? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Fun. What if it's bad decision correction? What if it's prevention of financial burden and we just redefine it? What if we change it for enjoyment to out of necessity? Now we should change the term fun, but you see we're redefining things here. Because anybody can redefine anything because that apparently we think we have the ability to do that. I can redefine anything to however I want it to be, right? Not in reality, but that's what we think. Who determines what necessity is? That's the next question, right? What do you mean necessity? Like live or die? Oh, we're back to live again. What do you know? Torture. Medical procedure to achieve the desired end. Could we redefine it that way? Good. I mean, when definitions are up for grabs and no one gets to have the ultimate say, yeah, you can redefine it however you want. Isn't it interesting? I thought about this morning when I was getting ready. That in the beginning, God spoke. And John tells us in the beginning was the Word. So who gets to do the defining? It's fundamental from Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God used words, spoke. There's a reason they use the term spoke. Because he is the definer. This is how far the land can go. This is where the water begins. Definition. And we say, we cast off your definitions, God. We'll define them ourselves. Even though the laws of nature attest to his definitions. See? That's what C.S. Lewis is arguing. Not torture, since baby has been redefined above. So you could just take torture and you can just say, well, we redefined it up here, so it's not really a baby anymore. So when is a baby a baby? We're getting there. We're getting there, right? There's a few options on the table. You could say the point of conception, right? You could say not the point of conception, right? Those are the two arguments. This is a logic argument. So this would say at, and you fill in the blank. This is kind of where the debate rages, right? You could say after they're born, or you could just say never. You realize that? It's never a baby. Because we've just redefined it to be something completely separate. So we have to change the terms across the board. But these are the options. When is it a baby? When is a baby a baby? It's an important question when you're trying to figure out this idea of human life and live and all this other stuff we've talked about. If anyone takes any position other than at the point of conception, what does this allow? Can you ever put this back in the box? Anything could be right. I mean, if you say it's not the point of conception, it's something after, then it's totally up for opinion, isn't it?
As to when.
And so now when you have allowed it at all, you have now opened the can of worms and you can't close this box again. Because what is to say that if it's at 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 39 weeks, 4 years old? When does it change from being a baby to being a young child or an adult or whatever? You have to have a defining point that I can't appeal to my opinion or your opinion or your opinion. I have to have some standard, remember? That has to be above all that I have to say is closer to what's right than yours. And we don't have that with this, do we? Unless you take the first argument. That at the minute something is alive, that's what we're going to call it. Let's talk about that a little bit. The predominance of human biological research confirms that human life begins at conception, fertilization. At fertilization, the human being emerges as a whole, genetically distinct, individuated, zygotic, living human organism, a member of the species Homo sapiens, needing only the proper environment in order to grow and develop. The difference between the individual in its adult stage and in its zygotic stage is one of form, not nature. Okay? Did you see some of the words?
They have everything they need for life.
Did you catch some of the words that we talked about? The words like grow, develop, systems that are allowed to function. These are the definitions of live, life. When is something alive? We do it with plants and animals. They're not done. They talk about 23 chromosomes versus 46. You get 23 from mom, you get 23 from dad, and when they come together, what happens? You have 46, and what does that mean? It's like math. Remember? The laws of nature and math are in the same category. So when these two come together, something happens. Growth, progress towards an end starts. Individually, not yet, but when they come together, something happens. Here they go again. An organism is defined as one, a complex structure of interdependent and subordinate elements whose relations and properties are largely determined by their function in the whole. And two, an individual constituted to carry on the activities of life, what do you know, by means of organs separate in function but mutually dependent, a living being. It is clear that from the time of cell fusion, the embryo consists of elements from both maternal and paternal origin, which function interdependently in a coordinated manner to carry on the function of the development of the human organism. From this definition, the single-celled embryo is not just a cell, but an organism, a living being, a human being. Okay? Sounds pretty clear. You guys ever heard of this? What is this? Yeah, the rule is do not harm, right? Do not harm. Where did this come from? Hippocrates, where was he at? Do you remember?
Greece.
Yeah. Back in the BCs, early ADs, that's kind of when this oath was out there. They still make doctors take this. Do not harm, that's the idea, right? Do no harm. I actually looked it up this week and read through it. Would you believe some of the stuff it says about abortion? I swear by Apollo, the physician. These are not Christians. Remember, the laws of nature exist no matter where you are. And he goes through a bunch of their gods and health and all healing and all the gods and goddesses that according to my ability and judgment, I will keep this oath and this stipulation. I will follow the system of regime, which according to my ability and judgment, I consider for the benefit of my patients and abstain from whatever is deleterious and mischievous. I will give no deadly medicine to anyone if asked, nor suggest any such counsel. That was the idea. And then he goes on and says this. And in like manner, I will not give a woman a pessary to produce abortion. Did you know that was in the Hippocratic Oath? With purity, with holiness, I will pass my life and practice my art. End quote. Is this a Christian? Because what did he believe? That it was harm. You were harming someone. And they take this oath. I read this week. I'm like, what? The Hippocratic Oath actually mentions abortion? It does. It's in there. So we did some of this one. We've kind of looked at this one. So this is where we're going next week. Next week, we're going to look at the biblical scriptural response to the question of abortion. And we'll see if we can land somewhere on where does God sit on this? What does he think about this in the terms of it?